Welcome back to the Hawks Zone Rundown, another episode of Pulse of the Hawks with Mookie Alexander. He's going to be joining us in just a few minutes here. We got a lot to cover. It's been a whirlwind of a couple of weeks here before. Since our last time of Pulse of the Hawks, we've had a couple emergency pods mixed in there. So Mookie has been here. He has been hanging out. But still, even this last week, man, with the reset of the offense, the introduction now press conference with Sam Darnold and Cooper Kupp, and it just does not end. So Mookie's coming on. We're going to break all of it down. We're going to take your Q&As, guys. Get your super chats in there. That's going to take priority. We're definitely going to get to those. So flood the comment section in, because on the latter half, we're going to have some fun with those. And anybody that's been watching the channel that hasn't yet subbed to the channel, go down, hit the subscribe button for us, like the videos, share the videos. It really helps out the channel. So on the other side, we're going to waste no time. Mookie Alexander, Pulse of the Hawks.
So y'all can sit here and ask me all the questions y'all want to.
Don't you ever talk about me!
Yeah, let's go. It's go time, baby.
Here comes Geno. Steps up, takes that shot to the end zone. It is Metcalf. 20.
I'm just about that action, boss.
You about to go get it. You just like to do it.
That's what it is.
Off me.
Nobody in the world can do it.
Are you kidding me? Trying to do that. Pass is caught back in. Jackson, Smith, and Jigba. The circus music rolls in. Throw it forward. Oh my goodness, he caught it.
This is the Hawks Zone Rundown with your hosts, Ryan and Bryce.
Welcome back to the Hawks Zone, guys. From the field goals, Mookie Alexander joining us again for our bi-weekly segment of Pulse of the Hawks. Mookie, man, almost forgot what you look like. Feels like we haven't had you on here forever, but it's good to have you back. I know you were with us almost every day there for those emergency pods, but glad things settled down again. We were tempted to do a couple other emergency pods, but man, enough was enough. But glad to have you back on a regular segment, Pulse of the Hawks. How's it going?
Yeah, it's been so long that it's not pitch black at 7 o'clock our time anymore. So yeah, it's just been like days. I mean, I thought that we could do an emergency pod the moment Pharaoh Brown signed with the Miami Dolphins, but that would have been more like a celebratory emergency pod, if anything.
Yes.
Yeah, a whole lot of stuff has been going on, including the main thing we'll talk about, which I wish I was home when the Cooper Kupp signing happened, but I was literally out grocery shopping, and it's a good thing I got the pre-write in, and my manager had to come in and publish it while I was trying to fiddle away, trying to figure out if I could get it done on my phone.
Yeah, hey, that was a great pre-write because it did happen, and let's start there. Let's start with this offensive reset. There's obviously a few guys at both sides of the football, but Cooper Kupp, you mentioned, just a week prior-ish, DK Metcalf was on the move. Lockett released. Now you're like, like this receiver room once looked like a strength, now is a complete question mark. They filled it up. They're looking pretty good right now as far as 1, 2, and 3. Cooper Kupp, people's big concern, the injuries, but here's a guy record setting in 2021. Been one of the best slot receivers in the past decade. If he can stay healthy, man, what's your thoughts initially when you heard about the news, and how do you like the Cooper Kupp signing?
When I saw the news and then I saw the contract 3 for $45, I was not happy because I feel like that would have been quite a bit. But I always got to remember it's just what the agent puts out, and it's Monday. He got signed Friday. We're still waiting on the contract details, like the official ones on Over the Cap, for a whole bunch of Seahawks high-profile signings. So we're playing a waiting game there. So I'd like to think that the guaranteed money is really what we're going to focus on with Kupp once we get those details, and that this is like a 1 or 2 year deal with basically outs every year. So if Kupp is anything like he was even a couple of years ago, then he's going to be a valuable piece to the Seahawks offense. Now, it's not just the fact that he's so good at the slot. It's the fact that he replaces Metcalf's blocking, because Smith and Jigba as an inline blocker is a liability. I mean, he just physically, he can't cope. Whereas Kupp, we've been victims of it for so long, where Cooper Kupp just puts any Seahawks defender in a blender and just puts him in jail, and that's the end of the play. So Kupp being a part of the run game. So now you got 2+ blockers on the team in Kupp and Bobo. So that's positive. I think that this is going to encourage Clint Kubiak to put Smith and Jigba out outside more often, out in the boundary. Now, I don't think that's where he's at his best, but you could still, there's nothing wrong with like interchanging those two in the slot. They're both slot machine masters. So my reservation, of course, is the health of Kupp, because after his Offensive Player of the Year season, ankle injury in 2022, I forgot what he got hurt, what hurt him in 2023. It might have been hamstring, and then injured again in 2024. So when you're into your 30s and you've got this injury history, it's easy to just stay there. So I'm concerned about that because of the depth, but I trust, well, maybe trust isn't the right word, but I expect Seattle to still draft a receiver early next month. Otherwise, like, the depth still needs some fixing, because I'm going to be semi-hot take-ish here. I don't think it's a lock Valdes-Scantling makes the roster.
Yeah, no, and that was my kind of thing too. When I've seen this receiver core that they brought together, now you have JSN, you have Cooper Kupp, you have MVS. The thing for me is exactly what you said, Mookie. JSN is not an inline blocker. And in Kubiak's system, he likes to reduce the splits of the receivers, bring them into those areas, help them chip on ends and move to backers and stuff like that. Almost kind of some of the responsibility a tight end would have at different points in the run game. And so for me, that's where I totally agree. I think they're going to go and get a receiver somewhere in day 2. I would say somewhere within those top 100 picks that they have of the 5 that they've got, where a guy like a Jaden Higgins or a Besh, I should say, from TCU, those type of receivers are guys they're going to want. They might get a bigger body guy that can get in there, get dirty and block, and help set the edge for this wide zone run tack that a Kubiak likes to run. The other things for me with this, entirety of this free agency that they've gone through is I like a lot of the signings, especially like DeMarcus Lawrence that they brought in, where they've also addressed the other side of the ball too. They haven't been completely focused on the offensive reset. They've made additions there. And I think with even Lawrence's contract, again, people saw the number and went 3 years, $42 million, like holy. And then you realize as it breaks down, really it's 2 years at $20 million guaranteed, which isn't bad for a guy that's still, in my opinion, a top run defender. May not get you the production in the pass rush, but comes in as a very good complementary piece in Mike McDonald's defense. And I think you might see a situation for D. Lawrence where he is used very similar to how Jadeveon Clowney was used in Baltimore.
Yeah, I could see that happening. And yeah, the Lawrence signing, initially I went, whoa, for that money at his age, but then the contract's a lot more reasonable, so I'm fine with it. Again, keeping in mind, it's another dude on the other side of 30 coming off a significant Liz Frank injury. So somebody in the comments, John Doe saying Kupp had a high ankle sprain, so maybe that's why he looks washed late last year. So yeah, the recurring ankle injury is going to be a thing to watch. But as far as the wide receiver position, I think that they still lack a speed element and, reliability plus it with your hands and speed, because Valdes-Scantling has got some quickness to him, but I mean, it's like being great at stealing bases, but also you hit 163. So, I mean, his drop rate is not really good at all. He's had issues and high profile drops throughout his career. So the Valdes-Scantling bit of it, I'm still wary of. It's like, it's a stopgap signing, but I feel like they're going to have a rookie in there in the mix. But yeah, they need a speed element because Kupp's not the fastest guy in the world. Smith and Jigba's got like short lateral quickness, but he's not a guy who's going to break away for long yards after the catch touchdowns. So you can see the changes to this offense and how they are kind of adjusting to life after Metcalf, life after Lockett lost his speed. They're going to try and function a little bit more, I guess, methodically, I guess you could say. Like, I don't anticipate just off of this Seahawks wide receiving group, and even if they add somebody, that we're going to see like shot plays bonanza. Like, this is not an offense designed for deep shots 50, 60 yards down the field against, with guys who are not known for that, or at least no longer capable of that in the case of Kupp.
Yeah, I mean, as far as the receiving core is concerned, you mentioned drafting a young guy. What about the tight end situation? He likes to run a lot of 12 personnel, and people got to realize you're going to see a completely different looking offense than what Ryan Grubb was, running, dip bombs away style, and just how it took a long time for plays to develop, especially with that offensive line being such a big issue. And that's why I like the Cup signing, because the number one thing is health, but because like you mentioned, both these guys can do magic outside the slot or in the slot. Cup brings that toughness too, and so how do you see maybe you talk about Scantling and might not even make this roster. What do you envision like the Seahawk offense looking like? Do you think they go get another tight end? Do you think that's still on the radar potentially here, or you think they're okay with what they got right now in that room?
Well, I'll tell you what, Juwan Johnson in his Monday morning, well, I guess morning for us, but maybe afternoon already in New Orleans, his media session with Saints reporters saying that the Broncos and Seahawks pursued him in free agency, and then he ultimately re-signed with New Orleans, which, where the hell is Saints getting this kind of money, man? It feels like they're $80 million over the cap every March, and then they somehow get under it and then just re-sign their guys or sign some free agents or whatever. But whatever tricks they pull, Juwan Johnson staying in New Orleans. So that in itself, the fact that Seattle was pursuing him, and I have no reason to disbelieve him because the logic is there. Sean Payton coached Juwan Johnson the first couple of years when he was still in New Orleans, and of course Denver needed a tight end. They got Evan Ingram instead. The Seahawks have got Clint Kubiak, and Kubiak managed to get his career highs in receptions and receiving yards out of him. So I think that's Noah Fant is still not out of the woods yet. Like, I'm comfortable AJ Barn is still going to be a significant part of this offense, but he may not necessarily be like tight end one. This guy's going to be a 60, 70 catch guy, and that's fine. His role as a rookie was really, really encouraging. But Johnson would be more of a receiving tight end. I mean, he's not a big tight end to begin with. He was a former wide receiver converted to tight end. So I wouldn't be surprised if they look at tight end early in the draft because, kind of the options of free agency right now are pretty much all but gone that are viable. So I think that, let's say Tyler Warren or Colston Loveland is there at 18. I don't think it's now out of the possibility that Seattle tries to get a tight end early. I mean, the last time they took a tight end in the first 2 rounds was with John Carlson, probably. I mean, that's like 2008. So I was a teenager back then. And then preceding him was Jeremy Stevens for reasons. Unfortunately, that didn't go too well. But you get the idea. John Carlson really would have been a good tight end if he didn't get concussed a bunch of times. It hurt. So, yeah, tight end is going to be an important part of this offense. And, Kubiak's not reinventing the wheel here because 12 personnel was a big thing for Waldron in 2022. But some of that was out of necessity because they had dudes who couldn't block on the offensive line. So Kubiak, I think, is still going to do a lot of 12 personnel, but take out Fant and replace him with a rookie tight end, and then you downsize your cap space allocated there. Because to me, $10.5 million a year for Fant when he's just been like decent for much of his time here, I really wouldn't want to be paying that money. And for what it's worth, I'm not sure I would have been keen on paying Juwan Johnson north of $10 million a year too. But whatever the case, it's the fact that they were interested in him that has me thinking they're still sniffing around for more pass catching weapons.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like when I look at, what Juwan Johnson said, and then when I think back to this offense that Kubiak runs, the Shanahan, all of that, it's like what I've been saying. The big physical target in this offense generally is your tight end. You look at the teams that run this offense, TJ Hawkinson in Minnesota, George Kittle in San Francisco, Higbee and Parkinson in LA. It's a staple across the board. And for me, I really do think if they sign Tevin Jenkins here between now and Wednesday, for say they ink a deal with Tevin Jenkins, and now you've got a guy that's potentially going to be your starting left guard, I think it leads the question, like you said, Mookie, if Colston or Tyler Warren sitting there at 18, I think there's a high chance Seattle may consider that and take, Loveland or one of these guys there, just because of the fact that now you're bringing another weapon. There's not a lot of 11 personnel. There is some in Kubiak's offense, but it's not a staple like it was last year. So that extra tight end that can be a pass catcher now becomes your third receiving option. You upgrade your position. You get 2 young tight ends in there with Barner and whoever the draft pick is. And then maybe you go and get a Tate Ratledge in round 2 or Donovan Jackson in round 2 with one of your picks at 50 or 52. If they're still sitting there, you're still addressing your O-line, but you're upgrading a position that you need to with some young talent.
Definitely. I mean, if there was ever a draft where they could try and load up on young offensive talent, I mean, it's not a great receiving group on paper, but tight end, totally different story. Running back, totally different story. No, that does not mean Seattle go take a running back in the second round for the 500th time. But you get the idea. At running back and wide receiver, they've got some options there. They're pretty fine at running back for now this year, but at wide receiver, there could still be some investment there and some good value play in the first, couple of rounds. And then tight end, boy, you're just spoiled. It's just an embarrassment of riches. Whether it's Tyler Warren or Gunnar Helm or what's the Georgia Tech dude's name? Jackson Hawes. There's so many options from day one all the way through day three that I feel like Seattle is well positioned to. It seems to me that Valdez, Scantling, and Kupp are very short-term plays just off of their age and their contracts. But while they're taking up time on 2025, you can still find guys like whoever they take at 18, if it's a tight end or whomever, and take a wide receiver a couple rounds later. Those are your future 3-4 years down the line type of players.
I think Kupp's most important piece out of his acquisition is potentially how he's going to affect the locker room in a positive way and his impact on JSN, because I think what he'll be able to do is help JSN take his game to another level. For another fact, if JSN will get to learn from one of the best slot receivers, he learned from Tyler, but he'll learn from another guy that was one of the premier NFL receivers for a period in time, who has a skill set very similar when he came out to JSN's, and maybe help JSN even elevate his game more. That's where I think you'll see the real value in Cooper Kupp. I still think he may post between 500 and 700 yards this year as a receiver, and that'll be very dependent on his health, but his ability to affect the culture in that locker room, I think, is going to be where you're going to see his biggest effect.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, he's still he's not a huge receiver, but the fact that he's a decent sized target at what, 6'2" and 200 something. So no, he's not Metcalf large, but even with his lack of pure raw speed, he still knows how to get open. I think that Kupp and JSN are going to feast on those dig routes, those crossers. So, provided they both stay healthy. JSN has been very healthy throughout his first 2 seasons. Kupp is a bigger issue. But the thing with Kupp is that he's also a damn good route runner. And I think that timing and the route running is going to be so key in this offense.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think, I agree with Bryce on just the leadership experience, Super Bowl. So yeah, I think it's going to be interesting when you look at this free agency, and I kind of look at it like John really had to pivot quickly. You take a look at Geno Smith and DK, like two, whatever your take is on Geno and DK, two pivotal pieces for the last few years here in Seattle. And he had to pivot quick. So he pivots. Now you bring in Sam Darnold, which, to us was a great move, and they did it quickly. And then you start bringing in some other free agents on both sides of the ball. When you look at the free agency, and we'll get to John's comments as well, but I want to ask you this. When you look at it as a whole, do you see this as, plugging in every sort of hole that needs to be filled, and then now they can go into the draft where they don't really have to reach, like you mentioned, okay, you know what? They'll probably take a receiver, but it's not like this crazy need right now because the short term you have Kupp. And JSN's obviously kind of emerged into that number one role. And, bringing in a DeMarcus Lawrence as well, great against the run, obviously has to stay healthy again. But, when you look at it as a whole, now Jenkins kind of feels like that final piece of, at least plugging some holes. How do you see the free agency? Are you looking at it like that? Like, all right, it was pretty good. I mean, last year it was so bad that I think, any year looks good now. But to me, I kind of I'm sort of happy with the direction, especially Sam Darnold. I mean, you look at the market, the quarterback market, the fact that they could land Sam and pivot like that was, you got to give credit to Schneider, right, when it's due. But how are you looking at it overall?
So when I look at Schneider's free agency, one, it's markedly different than last season. We're just doing 1 year stopgaps. And I don't think a single one of those dudes is going to end up on next year's roster. I can't remember if they've already been cleaned out. Like maybe Hankins and like one other person are 2024 free agents who are still unsigned right now. So they're not coming back. But in terms of the free agency process, I'm going to include the re-signings here. Really happy with the Ernest Jones contract. In fact, I don't think I was here the last time we even talked about it. And I'm cool with the Jaron Reed contract because Jaron Reed looks like his game is aging nicely. So those two free agents were really the only two free agents of consequence where you're thinking, at the very least, re-sign Jones. With Reed, you could see the other side of not retaining him, but the fact that he's staying, I mean, that's good, and he seems like he's a good locker room presence. As far as the actual signings, I'm sort of lukewarm because of how much they've invested on guys on the other side of 30, and that means Lawrence, and that means Cup, and even Valdez-Scantling. So like that is my one personal bias, where I was hoping that they would attack free agency by signing guys who are in their mid-20s or late 20s and may have their best years ahead of them. And even if they're like, not the highest profile free agents, they could be 1 or 2 year contracts that could turn into extensions, like we've seen with Uchenna Nwosu and Julian Love and Michael Bennett and others over the years. I mean, there's still time for that. Like if they sign Tevin Jenkins, then at least Tevin Jenkins is 27 years old. And again, somebody else with an injury history. But at the very least, he's been a plus starter on a really poor offensive line. So when he's available, like he seems to be an upgraded guard over anybody Seattle's put out, generally speaking, other than Damian Lewis for the last few seasons. But like Lawrence, Cup, and Valdez-Scantling, they could all be one and done. Let's be real here. But they're also not burning the cap with a lot of annoying 1 year signings of guys who've got no shot to be here in the long term. So like, what's the dude's name? John Charles, the Saints cornerback. Like, that's a nothing signing. That's a camp fodder move. Josh Jones, not the Josh Jones who was a really bad safety for the Seahawks a few years ago, but the offensive lineman Josh Jones. It's a whatever signing, $4 million and change. He basically replaces Fant, and he's got guard tackle flexibility. So I'm cool with that. But really, the Darnold contract is where I'm most pleased with Schneider, because it is kind of like Geno's previous deal. So not the one that he's looking to get, but the one that he got in 2023, where it's 1 year, maybe 2 years maximum, and it still doesn't preclude you from taking a quarterback this year. So if it doesn't work out for Sam in 2025, they could still cut bait in 2026 with all the cap space they're projected to have and not eat a ton of money and be in significant financial straits. So I think Schneider, for all the criticisms I have of him, I think he plays the cap pretty well in terms of these multi-year contracts. I mean, some have been not good, like Draymond Jones, but there are others like re-signing Ernest or the Darnold deal or the Geno deal, where I think him and the front office do a pretty good job of being financially responsible and not basically stretching out all the guarantees for several seasons.
Yeah, and honestly, in regards to that, let's kind of pivot to John a little bit here. And obviously, he had his off the Sam Darnold press conference, his moment with the media, and he had some very interesting things to say about the DK and the Geno situations and how those evolved. And then he even had his John Schneider show where Mike McDonald was with him on it, and they kind of talked about it a bit with Bob and Dave there on 710. Mookie, what did you take away from first John's off the podium one with just the Seattle media and the way he addressed, Geno and DK's situations there, and as well what he gave away a little bit in the John Schneider show he has?
Yeah, the DK thing, now it reads a lot more like it was more than just a money thing as far as his future on the team. And I tweeted this out several days back, like the instability on offense for the Seahawks, I don't think is an insignificant thing. I mean, this would have been the fourth offensive coordinator in 6 years, or will have been the fourth offensive coordinator in 6 seasons for Metcalf, or 7. It would have been year 7 here. You're constantly going through offensive line coach changes. Now, the Eagles go through offensive coordinator changes all the time, but they fired one guy and a couple others became head coaches. There's a big difference between your guys losing their jobs or taking other jobs because they're future NFL head coaches, and guys losing their jobs, coordinators losing their jobs because they keep getting fired. And in DK's case, he has seen Schottenheimer get fired, not just get fired. He got fired in DK's best season to date. And then you get Waldron effectively fired by proxy because Pete got let go. And then Grubb fired in a season. So, I mean, this constant turnover and all the talk about running the ball and trying to work through play action, not necessarily be this high volume passing attack. I can see Metcalf thinking, it's time for a fresh start, because it seems like we're kind of hitting a reset button here. I got to go through another starting quarterback, a new offense to learn, all that jazz. So I feel like there was some tension there involving Metcalf and the Seahawks brass that eventually worked itself into let's move on. And frankly, at north of $30 million a year, I can see, and I said it last time, I could see why Seattle wasn't willing to pay that, and Pittsburgh absolutely was, because other than Pickens, and they don't really have a lot of receiving talent, so they were desperate to make a big move. So it worked out for Metcalf, and congratulations to him on his engagement, incidentally. As for Geno, so my semi-conspiracy theory is if it looks like there was a low ball offer, low ball by the standards of what Geno wanted, not necessarily like it was a clear great offer, but $35 million, if that was what was reported by Albert Breer, and I think reported by, was it Garofalo? Sorry, Mike Garofalo. I don't remember how you pronounce his name. I'm pronouncing it like it's similar to Jimmy Garoppolo, but whatever the case, maybe my semi-conspiracy theory here is they kind of wanted to move on from Geno, and that lowballing was one way to kind of induce a trade. And if they were going to be that far apart, then there was really no shot of retaining Geno. So getting cheaper quarterback doesn't mean they're getting better at quarterback. And I want to make that clear. But it could get better in the long term just based off of Darnold's age, not necessarily like anything else, because Darnold is still on a 1-year sample size. But yeah, the Geno comments are interesting because there's some contradictions with the reporting. Like, did Geno request a trade or he didn't request a trade? And I think he said he didn't request a trade, right?
Yeah. I mean, it sounded like he didn't. I mean, look, when I listened to John, and we criticized John, it felt authentic. It felt like they were shocked that there was no counter or no negotiation, right? Like they might have thrown out what you said was a quote unquote low ball, but sometimes they might say, okay, here's our starting point, and they might have had a line drawn in the sand. But for me, I felt like it was one of those, like, not requested a trade, but like enough to say my number's so high that you were probably just so far apart, might as well let's move on, right? So like you said, maybe the Seahawks want to move on. Like we've talked about, John wasn't really super tied in with Geno per se. Like it was sort of felt like a take it or leave it thing. We joke about how when Drew Lock wasn't even under contract, they were talking about Drew Lock, right? I mean, it's like, the guy's not even signed, right? So that was DK for me. You could see the disappointment on John's face. Like there's a guy he drafted. He seemed like he genuinely liked the guy. And that to me seemed like maybe he was throwing a curveball on that one. Again, I mean, I agree with you, man. I think it's one of those things where you've seen OCs getting fired, new play callers. Like it could just be, enough's enough. And I think some of it too is like, he hears all the outside rumblings, like, you're not this top tier guy because, you're barely breaking 1,000 yards here. And it could be a case where it's just like, let me go show you I can do it. Let me go somewhere else where I can do it. The only thing to me that is wild, and he's going to a place with absolutely no quarterback right now. So, I mean, in Pittsburgh, that's going to be a wait and see how they get it. The Green Bay thing for me would have made a ton of sense. That rumor that was for DK Metcalf's sake. You get a young stud in Jordan Love with a good football team. I mean, I would have, for me, just being a DK fan, I would have rather seen, I know they're in the NFC, but I would have rather seen him go there just to kind of see how good he could be there. I think in Pittsburgh, man, it's just, they don't even have a guy to throw the football. So how's that going?
We've got an interesting comment here, though, from Patrick. I'm going to throw up here. He goes, Mike and John said the right things. They expected Geno to be around. Geno was their guy until he wasn't. His unwillingness to deal is why he's gone. I agree.
Yeah,
like
negotiate. He didn't
negotiate. And then this is another one that's interesting here from Ryan. I mean, with the Raiders still not paying Geno shows a lot that a man is not worth 35 plus. Good luck with the Raiders. Yeah, that's another thing. Geno hasn't signed his extension, which we all thought would have been pretty quick once he got traded there, that it was like probably they had already had their discussions. It was ready. And like the fact he's still not signed, wasn't it yesterday that his contract for this year, there was a bonus attached to it if he had stayed in Seattle?
Yeah.
I mean, are they, you think he's still sticking like hardball with that 45 down in Vegas right now? And they're just like, nah, man, it ain't happening here either. What do you think of that, Mookie?
Well, I saw Diana Rossini report that they expected to extend him in the $40 to $45 million
Yeah.
range.
Yeah.
If we put a hang up or something. I mean, Geno's, unlike Metcalf, who had this big social media post on Instagram,
Right.
thanking Seahawks fans. Geno kind of had a quick tweet, just wishing I could have expressed my love for Seattle even more. I can't remember exactly how it went, and I'll look it up while we're recording. But I think it's pretty interesting. Darnold has had his press conference, and Geno hasn't had his yet in Vegas. So, like the traders process, like we don't have to worry about that. Like that's done.
Yeah.
But it is interesting that we haven't seen Geno and Pete together. And I also, getting back to Schneider, the fact that the Raiders were the only bidder that they even entertained, I think this kind of tells you, as far as just the Pete connection, exactly what was going to happen. I think it was going to be one of those things where if they didn't get a trade done with the Raiders, they would have cut him. And the fact that we got a third-round pick, I wish it was a higher third-round pick than the one they actually got, but, beggars can't be choosers in that sense. But the fact that they got a third-round pick, I believe, is about as good as they could have expected, given his age. And I know that the metrics would be indicating that he was better than the 21 touchdowns and 15 interceptions indicated. But I don't think there was going to be a huge market for Geno because most other teams, like, say, Tennessee, they're going to draft a quarterback. They're not going to sign Geno. And then the other teams that would want a quarterback, they'll probably sign somebody cheaper, or they'll be in the market for a rookie quarterback. So I feel like it just kind of worked out that if Pete didn't come back to the Raiders, then maybe Geno stays here or maybe he gets cut. But whatever the case, I don't think a trade happens. So,
No. Well, I mean, and what is the market for, what is the market for 35-year-old quarterbacks? And when you talk about that number, stats are stats. People can't cherry pick. People want to they want to look at certain stats, like, your completion percentage, but then you want to ignore the other things. Those are his stats. That's what you have to judge him on. I mean, especially if you're not watching all his game film, right? Like if we sit down, we can, we can break down Geno's game a lot differently, but those are statistics. And not to mention leading the league in red zone interceptions, which I look at that as like a complete no-no, right? So if now you're coming in and expecting a high dollar here, and we talk about guys that are north of 30. I mean, quarterbacks, look, man, I mean, Tom Brady acts like he's setting the bar. Most guys, they get into their mid-30s, late 30s, man, you're on the decline. So I think I don't think the phone rang at all. So to your point, I think it could have been a cut. I think the third-round pick is a bonus. I mean, it's good. I really like the move, not because I don't like Geno Smith, but I like how I think Sam Darnold has a way higher ceiling. I think we know what we had in Geno Smith. I think now with Darnold, you got that option. We're going to get to the comments. I see one in there about drafting QBs. I think that's what's on everybody's mind. Now it kind of gives you, again, that ability to say, okay, we don't have to press and go get a dart at 18 now. It's like, hey, no, we have this young guy that his ceiling is a lot higher than Geno's. Like you said, the floor might be lower, but his ceiling's higher. And maybe he transitions into that guy. What are your thoughts on that?
well, first of all, I want to thank Brendan Myers for finding the post. My love for Seattle cannot be described in words. I wish I could have done more to express that. Thank you for a memorable 6 years. I feel like there's going to be more said once there's a press conference or something, because I mean, the relationship between the fans and Geno is kind of odd, because remember all the Geno chants when Russ busted his finger and then he leads a 98-yard touchdown drive in his first non-garbage time action ever.
That was beautiful.
Yeah, that kind of felt like the beginning of the end of the Russ era. And then there were still chants throughout 2022, and then there's the Denver game on Monday night. But you're beloved until you aren't. And I'm old enough, we're all old enough to remember when fans were also chanting for Charlie Whitehurst while Hasselbeck was throwing a bunch of interceptions in his final season here. So it kind of got to that point where I think Geno got paid more, and the productivity in terms of touchdown passes. We could have lived with the interceptions if he was throwing 35, 40 touchdowns. Like Baker Mayfield threw 17 picks, and he also threw 41 touchdowns. Now, he's in a much better scheme than the one that Grubb put him in. But still, the fact of the matter is, not every fan is going to be as like-minded as us. So, yes, the Grubb hire literally
destroyed the offense.
He got himself fired. He basically got Huff fired, and he got so many people to lose their jobs as a result, or get shipped to other places. But the Geno stuff is definitely it took an unfortunate turn. I feel like he ends up not being as appreciated as he should have been, and it was just kind of like unfortunate circumstance of he got the first 2 seasons on really poor defenses with no running game. Then he has a better defense, still no running game, and then kind of just things didn't break as expected. And he had some bad turnovers, like the Rams game.
Terrible.
The Rams game this year was bad.
Terrible.
Not the last pick, because I think that should have been a hold. But the other pick, the pick 6, that might have been, I called it at the time, the unofficial end of the Geno era.
Yeah.
And I think it was kind of prophetic, sadly. So, yeah, I kind of forgot what your question was, Ryan, as far as
just with Sam and his ceiling there. I think, because I look at Geno too, and like you said, the energy. I mean, age does play a factor. I think if he was 27, 28, we'd be having a different conversation, even with all those turnovers. Like I mentioned the red zone, you mentioned the red zone. It was too many for me to say, let's run this back at 45 a year. I mean, and it's too much for everybody. John was, you can't entertain that, right? So you look at Sam, and with the ceiling higher, what are your thoughts on that, where they don't really have to draft a guy per se in need now, because you have this young guy that, I know what you said, he's only got sort of that really good year, but he was in a good system. So what are your thoughts now, how the Seahawks look at Sam with the ceiling? That do you think they look at him like he could transition to that next guy, where it doesn't mean they won't draft a guy, but maybe they either wait till next year or draft a later guy? But how do you look at that now with the Seahawks perspective, how they might be looking at Sam Darnold?
They might see Darnold as not quite another Geno, but maybe kind of a mix of Geno and Baker. Now, I say the Baker side because it kind of gets lost to history that he was actually pretty good the year they made the playoffs in the COVID season, 2020. Now, I could take a lot of 2020 stats with a grain of salt, with the way that offenses are just going gangbusters on defenses all season, but you could see the talent in Mayfield. And also, he won Offensive Rookie of the Year in 2018.
I love Baker. So
Baker had some good moments. And then, after that first year in Tampa, maybe we went, okay, that's, he's got a good year under him after a couple of bad ones. Now let's see what happens. And he's been better since then. Now with Darnold, like, this is his first complete season where you go, okay, this is actual objective good quarterback play. Now, does the system help? Absolutely. But does Nick Mullins also throw 35 touchdowns to 12 picks? Hell no. So Darnold was doing some legitimately impressive things in that offense, and it did fall apart for him over the last couple of weeks. But you could see that there was talent there for him to be super productive and make some clutch throws. And it wasn't always just Jefferson doing insane work. I mean, he didn't have Hawkinson for much of the year. So, and that was not a great rushing attack either. So we're kind of in an era where if the coordinator can scheme up easy looks for let's say quarterbacks who are not as good as Mahomes and Allen, then you can get a functional high-end starter. Now, I don't know what his ceiling is in terms of, like, is it a top 3 or top 5 quarterback? To me, if you're in the top 10, 11, 12-ish, you've got a shot to make a playoff run. The Vikings are just a bit unfortunate that a 14-3 season in that particular division wasn't even enough for a first-round bye. It got you a wild card. So I think the vision for McDonald and Schneider is, if we can maintain Darnold's performance, even if there's like a slight drop-off, acknowledging offensive line, whatever, if we can maintain that and the defense can continue to be on the rise, because Minnesota's defense was outstanding, we can be in a position where we're back in the playoffs and we can make a run. We can maybe at least win a playoff game. I'm not saying make a Super Bowl run with Sam Darnold, but that it's possible. Now, the floor is definitely lower in the sense that we've seen the worst of Darnold, and it's much more recent than the worst of Geno, which was like several years worth of him sitting on the bench, and then preceding that was the Jets. So if the floor is lower with Darnold, then people are going to get their jobs in jeopardy, Schneider included. But they're out for that. Like, if it doesn't work for him, then they'll probably move on and find another quarterback. But, I was like anti-Darnold for a good while, like a big skeptic, didn't think that he was all that, and that it was more than just the Jets tax for why he was struggling. But at the very least, I am Darnold neutral. I think it can work with him and Clint Kubiak in this offense, pending, of course, this offensive line. And if this offensive line can be competent, I'm not saying repeat 2005 and have Walton Hutch out there, just competent, then Darnold should be competent.
Yeah, and that we kind of had this discussion, me and Ryan as well, where it's like, I look at Sam Darnold, like, I like Sam Darnold coming out of USC when he was coming out of college. I thought, yeah, there's a lot to like about his game. And then he obviously went to the Jets, and we've seen what the Jets have done to quarterbacks. And it's not just one, it's not just two, it's now 3 or 4 potentially quarterbacks. They've had the ability to ruin their careers at some point or another. For me, I went back and even watched Darnold in his time at Carolina because he got injured to begin with, and that was when Baker and him were both in Carolina, which was such an odd thing to have those two guys in the same quarterback room at the same time. But he did well down the stretch of when he played. They went 4-2 down the stretch for that Carolina team. Then he goes to San Francisco and he sits a year. Then he goes to Minnesota and kind of has his resurgence. The thing for me, when I was listening to his press conference, he seems so much more self-aware of what caused him problems at the beginning of his career and how to address and fix those going forward at this point in his career. Like, you can see the maturity of him realizing, like, hey, I don't need to do everything. I just need to get the ball to my playmakers and let them do the things. And that's the thing with this Kubiak offense, and why I think it fits so well is they have so many release valves in that offensive passing system where it's like, hey, if your first and second read aren't there, boom, this is where your third read will be. It's an easy throw. It's a check down. We'll live and play the next down. Like, the defense matched up well. We're okay. We'll take our check down or whatever. And that was the thing I felt, even in those last 2 games, the Detroit game, I put more on Sam Darnold for having a bad game. The Rams game, their offensive line Minnesota's offensive line got completely embarrassed by the Rams. Like, Jared Verse and for Fisk and that entire D-line just ransack all over that Vikings D-line. And like you said, Mookie, they didn't have much of a run game. So it was like watching a typical Seattle game for most of the year. Our quarterback dropping back to pass, and there was nobody open because he couldn't get the ball out. So for me, I'm very excited to see what Sam does. I have a more optimistic view than most on what I think Sam can do in this system. Now, again, it is very much bent on how they adjust this offensive line. If Javon Jenkins is signed here in the next 48 hours, great. That's a great first step in that direction of solidifying a competent, as you put it so well, offensive line. That's the key thing here. We're not asking this offensive line to be top 5. We're not even asking it to be top 10. We're asking it to be competent and above, like, the minimum league average. That's what we're asking of this group. And I think it's something that can be done. And I think it starts with whether or not they can get Tevin Jenkins in the building. And from what I understand, he's here, or he's arrived at some point later today. And the, meeting might take over into tomorrow while of his visit and his physical. But I wouldn't expect John Schneider to bring this guy in if they didn't have some sort of agreement already in logistics on how this contract's going to look.
Yeah, we also got to acknowledge that Lucas Patrick was brought in for a visit, and he's a former, I think he started with the Packers and then went to the Saints. So there's another element to play. But again, somebody into his 30s, like, I don't want to like a Tomlinson redux. Now, Patrick has got at least versatility. I think he's done guard and center. But, I'm more warm to the idea of signing Jenkins than I would be signing Lucas Patrick. If it's Patrick, in which case it must be familiarity with John Benton and Clint Kubiak. Otherwise, like, I would put more faith in the draft picks than anything else, or some of your younger dudes. And that's how I also feel about Garrett Bradbury, incidentally, that he just got cut by the Vikings just because he had a year's worth of snaps with Darnold. I don't think that's enough to justify just bringing him on board. I feel like you could roll with Olavutimi, you could roll with Sundell, or just draft somebody. And to me, that would be better than bringing in another vet who probably won't amount to much, because the Vikings offensive line, Darrisaw is the star. And then when he got hurt, the Vikings offensive line got worse. Bradbury was among the liabilities, and so was Ed Ingram, to the point where he's benched and then he got traded. So, and yes, Patrick Osman noted. Patrick noted that Patrick, on St. Patrick's Day, has played left guard and center. So, yeah, the Darnold stuff, I think that's another thing you brought up in the press conference, not just some of the things that he struggled with early on, but also some of the things that he acknowledged he had issues with the last couple of weeks, as far as not getting the ball out, taking some unnecessary sacks. And kind of a hidden fact, but his sack rate was higher than Geno's. And part of that is he is not as mobile as Geno, as funny as it is to say. I mean, Geno was one of Seattle's most explosive rushers. I think he had like 14 rushes of 10-plus yards, and he might have had more than K9, which says a lot more about the run blocking for K9 than it does about Geno turning into Michael Vick or Lamar Jackson. But whatever the case, if this offense could be more of a timing-based offense, just get the ball out on time, something that Geno could do well in, but, he's not here anymore, so let's move on to Darnold. Then hopefully the sack rate can go down. and that's they can get more like on time, on schedule plays so that we're not constantly watching 3rd and 7 and beyond.
Yeah, no question about it. I mean, we always thought Geno had the legs. We're always like, man, get him out, run a little more. But like you said, he's not here anymore. Sam's here, and man, let's move on. Hey, why don't guys, Pulse of the Hawks here, man. Let's get your comments, flood them in, keep flooding them in. We're gonna jump into some of these comments. Want to take a few right now?
Sure, let's do it. Let's get into our viewer
Okay,
Q&A right
let's
now.
go
There we
viewer
go.
Q&A. Here's the first one. Are we drafting the quarterbacks here? We sort of touched on, or I sort of thought that maybe, they don't necessarily need to. I think, they can draft some other positions of need or, whatever. But I mean, I can see them doing it, but I also can see them because of his history. And now that they do have a quarterback, plus Sam Howell, we got to remember, he's still here. He's still young, and you got a Kubiak system. What do you guys think?
I think that they will seriously, strongly consider drafting a quarterback this year, and probably in the middle rounds. So not a 7th round flyer on like Seth Hennigan or somebody from Memphis. I mean, Howell is here, but he's also got a year left on his contract on a very, very cheap deal. So, in fact, so cheap that even though he would be the odds on to be on the roster, unless Seattle rolls with 3 quarterbacks, which they have normally not done, a rookie quarterback in the 3rd or 4th round would be competing for the backup job against Howell. So basically, the earlier they draft a quarterback, the more under threat Sam Howell is than Sam Darnold. If they take a quarterback in the 6th or 7th round, that's a quarterback who's fighting to make a roster spot behind Sam Howell.
Yeah, when I look at this now and the Sam Darnold deal and how I think Seattle views it in a way, I think they have an optimistic view on Sam, that even though the way this contract is structured, a lot of people think it's a 1 year, oh my God, then we're getting out if he's bad. I think there's some things in that where it might be a 2-year thing. He just might be a more expensive backup if he's bad in year 1, which I don't think is going to happen. I think Sam will be fine. I agree, Mookie. I think there is a chance they do it this year. But for me, I know one guy I think that is kind of off their radar is Tyler Shuck, because it doesn't make sense to draft a quarterback that old when you have the guy that's got NFL experience that is almost the same age as your starter. I think it will be more of a lean into a Will Howard or a Kyle McCord or a Quinn Ewers or Riley Leonard. Those are the 4 names. Like, I know everyone wants to talk about Jackson Dart. I don't think Seattle is going to spend pick 18 on Jackson Dart unless they absolutely fall head over heels in love with him and rate him as their number 1 guy on their board when they get to pick 18 and he's there and he's beating out like a Shamar Stewart or a, Tyler Booker or a Kenneth Grant. I don't believe Jackson Dart will be the guy. Jackson Dart would be more in play for the Seahawks, I think, at pick 50 or pick 52, but not at pick 18, because I don't think they're going to have him as the top player on their board come draft night. So I think there is definitely some conversation for it. I think there's also conversation that whether it's this year or next year, Seattle will draft a rookie quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, I could definitely see next year, and I could see this year. But I mean, just because of John's history now, I was convinced. But I mean, with the Sam signing, it can go either way for me, man. But this one here from John Doe, after the Darnold contract details, I'm convinced they'll draft a QB just in case they want to sit Darnold not going well. Bryce, you just touched on. I mean, I think there's kind of 2 camps to it, right? Like you're kind of like you said. I think there's they have outs on this contract with Darnold, but yeah, so you could see it, but man, I think things would have to go really bad this year, because it's not like you're bringing in a first round guy. So, like to your guys' point, if you bring in a middle round dude, like, I mean, for me, how quickly would you move off Sam in the first year here? Like, I think it would have to be like the Sam Darnold of old. And I look at Sam too, man. You talk about, he was what, 3rd overall pick, and he went to the Jets. That people got to realize the organization is a huge factor. So I'm just basing it off of what you've done for us lately. And so are the Seahawks. So we'll see. Bryce, why don't you read this one out?
We got what do you guys think about a 5-pick DBs or 5-pick DBs getting $30 million a year? Goddamn, this league is out of control. Better hope Witherspoon doesn't snatch 6 this year. Yeah, Stingley got paid a lot of money. Lenore got paid a lot of money last year. Horn got paid money. Like, it's an interesting conversation to have because, again, Reek Woolen is up at the end of this year. And I think that's even more pressing than Witherspoon to an extent because, there's such a back and forth. We talk about DK and Geno being a polarizing player in Seattle. Reek Woolen's right in that category. He is a phenomenal athlete. But you heard it throughout last year, concentration issues that Mike McDonald alluded to, getting sat for the first quarter of a game because he violated team rules in an important game versus Green Bay. Like, for me, for them to keep Reek Woolen and pay him that number that you've seen these corners get, he has to have a first-team all-pro season and be locked in from game one to get that money. Otherwise, if Seattle, for whatever reason, gets a really good offer at the trade deadline, I do not think they'll trade him on draft day. But if they get a good offer at trade deadline, maybe they consider it. Worst case, I think they let him walk and they get the third-round comp pick for him.
I just think they don't pay him because you got to pay Devin. That's what I look at. I mean, you can't have two, and to the market, you got like Sun 1C is saying like the market's out of control. Mookie, I mean, you can't pay two corners like that, right? I mean, who knows what Witherspoon's gonna want when he comes up.
Yeah, what's odd is it's not just the 90 million that Stingley got. So there's like 89 million guaranteed. And I don't know how much it was like guaranteed from like the existing season onward because what year? So he'd be in this is his fourth season in the league, right? So he'd still be on his rookie deal, but like tacking on to that, I mean, that's incredible because the top corner before that was JC Horn at 25 million a year. And, Witherspoon, that's going to be a different debate because he's mostly a slot guy. Like he could play on the outside. But all your other top corners are generally guys who are boundary corners. So like Trent McDuffie with the Chiefs, they moved him outside after being in the slot. And so he's predominantly an outside corner. So that whole discussion about Seattle's cornerback situation is going to be very, very intriguing to watch because Witherspoon we can worry about next season. He's not eligible for anything this year. But Woolen is very much a story worth following because it also depends on how Seattle drafts this year. I mean, they're going to churn the bottom end of the depth chart because Trey Brown and Artie Burns are gone. So they signed John Charles, and now we'll see who else they get. But at the top, Josh Jobe is retained, but he's kind of like in that Trey Brown, Mike Jackson. He's a good second option. But that number one option we think is Reek Woolen. Is Reek Woolen worth even $25 million a year? Forget Stingley because not everybody. They're not all going to keep resetting the market. But yeah, Woolen really needs an outstanding season in pass coverage, I think, for him to be considered worthy of a top extension. And really, I mean, it's a big offseason ahead because Seattle's got so much cap space for 2026. Want to know how they got so much cap space? They haven't extended anybody from 2022 yet. So we're going to be on the lookout for all the key players there.
Yeah. Yeah. Here's another. Sorry.
Go ahead.
I don't know. Here's another one. I can't really remember too many baller Geno performances except the Detroit games, Dallas against the Rams backups when the bag was on the line. LOL. He's talking about the incentives and stuff. I'm not a fan of the incentives, but that's how the contract was written out. But that is funny. That is funny. And you know what? To his point, I'll let you guys touch on this. Yeah, I agree, man. Like, I think Geno is who he is. He was kind of that middle of the road guy that kept you, quote unquote, competitive. But, I think they were fine with him walking out the door, hence the low starting point and being that, I look at it like you lost us some games. You had some big, you did have a few baller moments, but I just, I look at it like I liked his time here. No hate on him. I appreciated what he did. I thought it was a great story when he started for Russ, or when Russ left and he started the Broncos game. We talk about those moments. Like, yeah, it was awesome. Like, everybody hated Russ that first game. Like, everybody, that whole stadium, like, nothing more. I remember going into that, right? It was like, it didn't matter because, the expectations were so low with that team. It was like, we don't care how the rest of the year goes as long as you beat Denver and Russell Wilson coming into our house. Remember that? And it was a great year, great story for the team. But like you said, as he got more expensive and it became, it was kind of like, where are all the quote unquote baller moments? And for me, man, I think it was a good 3 years. and I'm excited to kind of move on and see what now the Sam era brings.
I think he had more baller moments than what John laid out. So I think the Patriots game last year was a baller moment, especially when they had close to zero running game. Now, New England ended up having a surprisingly shitty defense that year, but whatever the case, like Geno absolutely carried them to victory. First year, the New Orleans game, he really balled out. And unfortunately, Taysom Hill, who was mentioned in the chat, by the way, in comparison, like, can Jalen Milroe be another Taysom Hill? No. I think they would just try to make him a quarterback. But whatever the case, like the New Orleans game, he was great in 2022. And it just ended up in loss. I think the problem is a lot of Geno's best games were not wins. So like the Dallas game, the New Orleans game, even the Raiders game, I think he had one turnover, but he also balled out in that game. And the Raiders just ran over them with Josh Jacobs. I thought he was really good in the Arizona road game in his first season. I think he was good in the Chargers game for a bit. It might have tapered off in the second half, but he had more memorable games than it feels like. And he certainly had a baller moment against the 49ers for sure, with that rushing touchdown at the end. It's just that the pick was what stuck in everybody's craw. His bad moments tend to be like outsized compared to all of his good moments. And the good moments too often are Geno puts up really impressive numbers as the Seahawks bleed points at the other end and don't win.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. No, I think he's had more than that. But to his point, I think, for me, it's sort of he's reached his ceiling in a way. So you talk about, and there has been a regression, I think. Like you mentioned 22, that New Orleans game, that's one that stuck out in my mind, especially with Lockett. As far as talking Lockett, 2 complete bombs and beautiful thrown balls, by the way, like those were dimes. So not taking anything away. But there has been a bit of a regression. And when you look at his age, like I said, I think if we are a 27, 28-year-old quarterback, we might be having a different conversation. But when you start seeing even a slight regression, OC aside, offensive line, if you see that you think there's it's kind of this guy going a little downwards, and his age, I think, and John's, moved off guys at the right time of the pass. I think it's a great move now to the baller points. Yeah, I mean, I think there could be other games, but like you said, when the negatives sort of overshadow, then I think, like, to his point, then you might forget about some of those other ones. And like you said, the run defense was horrible in past seasons too, so it's hard. But
one game I'll say too was the Arizona game last year that they played in Arizona. He did play really well in that game when we had a running game that actually worked, and we were all like, "Hey,
Atlanta too." I'll give him credit.
Atlanta, he played well too. So again, there are games that Geno did play well.
Well, for sure.
But here's one defeated, man. Indoor Geno is like the best, which is why maybe he'll work out.
Well, too bad. It's too bad he wasn't here 30 years ago with the Kingdom.
The Kingdom existed. So Nick comes in with, I feel like that Pete's gone. John makes better, quicker changes and decisions. That's a fair point. Like to an extent, like the pivoting of John this offseason, like I don't know if he would have necessarily pivoted as much with Pete, even if the situations with DK and Geno had played out the same. He was much more decisive and getting these done quick. Like we all were talking, okay, like, are they going to take the DK trade request up to the trade, like to the draft? That happened so quick compared to what we all were relatively expecting, that like, hey, like they may drag this. No, like he's gone. Like we're moving on. And so that may play a point in John's change a little bit, is the fact that he's quicker to move off of players now than maybe he would have in the past, potentially with Pete being here.
I'm not quite there yet. I think I need another offseason to figure that out, because if we're going better, quicker changes and decisions, I'm going to assume this is read as better decisions as well. It is impossible to look at last year's draft, free agency class and think those are better decisions. Like,
agreed.
They had to move on from Dotson. I mean, at least Baker turned into Ernest Jones, but that free agency class last year was like the worst of John, because there've been too many free agency classes. They're kind of just wasting their time with signings who've got no future here beyond their first season. So yeah, John also has to make different decisions, because he's only got 2 years left on his existing deal, to our knowledge. So the idea that anybody who thought that Seattle was just going to tank this year or whatever on purpose and trot out like you, me, and Ryan as the wide receivers this year, like that wasn't going to happen. Like you don't do that unless you've got unquestioned job security and an extension coming in 2027.
Plus, some organizations just don't have that mentality of tanking. That's just not what some organizations do, and I hate that. Anyways, I'm not on board. I just find you can get lucky, but I usually see that as a loser organization mentality, and most of those organizations stay at the bottom, right? They continually draft in the top 5, and we've seen it time and time again. And so, yeah, I think more it's also a mindset and just this is how we want to do things. And that's, even if I feel like even if they didn't have some of these guys, they would retool somehow. Like I just don't see John doing that ever.
Agreed. So 3D Tables comes in with Grubb really found a way to out horrible Waldron's first year. He really did. I would say that Grubb might be I would say Grubb is on par with Jeremy Bates for worst OC we have had in the last 15 years in Seattle. Like that's where he sits right now. And it's sad because I was super excited about the hire. I'd watched what he had done at Washington. I think a lot of people were, but he's really down there because I would put him below Shoddy, Bevel, and Waldron at this point. I think the only one he's got in company with him is Jeremy Bates.
Oh, I mean, he's worse than Bates because Jeremy Bates had to deal with an aging Matt Hasselbeck at quarterback, playing Charlie Whitehurst a few snaps, with Mike Williams, big Mike Williams as your number one receiver, the OG Mike Williams, not the one with the Chargers, or I think the dude who played at Tampa Bay. And then you had like Brandon Stokely and Ruvel Martin and like
Ben Obamanu.
Yeah, Ben Obamanu. You had, before Marshawn came there, you had Julius Jones starting at running back.
Oh, God,
Justin Forsett. At least I like Justin Forsett, but John Carlson was by far one of their most dangerous offensive weapons, and they traded Deion Branch midseason. So there wasn't a lot to work with. It's just that Bates had a hang up with, like, that Atlanta game sticks out to me from when Bates was here, when he's calling a rollout with Matt Hasselbeck in his own end zone. Like, dude, who do you think Matt is in 2010? So it ended up as like a strip sack touchdown. That's probably the moment Pete said enough's enough. But Grubb was worse relative to the talent he had. But it's not all of his fault, because he probably shouldn't have been in such a position to go from no NFL experience directly to a pretty important job on a team that was ready to compete.
All right, here's our next one. Sun Onesie. Geno's too busy living it up with Shedeur Sanders in the casino backrooms to be doing press conferences and signing extensions.
Hey, man.
Oh, man. That's
Shedeur could end up being Geno's backup pretty soon.
Can you imagine that? Oh, Vegas. Oh, boy. Vegas is going to get a party going on down there.
Yeah, I mean, hey, there could be some truth to that. I mean, we don't know, but you know what? It's if Shedeur goes there, man, that would be scary.
Imagine if it's Shedeur and Shiloh both end up there. Both Sanders boys end up. One coached up by Pete. Deion's gonna have a field day. He'll be in Vegas.
Where do the Raiders pick again? First round?
6.
The other 6 or 7. If it was 7, then that's perfect for Vegas. But
I mean, yeah, there's a big possibility.
I think there's more of a possibility they will get Shedeur if he slides. I don't think they're taking him at 6. I think they're going to take Genty if he's there at 6.
Right. And
that's what I think what they'll do, but you never know. They've done weirder things. Pete's not completely in control like he was in Seattle with John. Mm-hmm. So it could be interesting. Tom Brady may overrule them all and say, we're taking Sanders here. So, and the follow-up here, LOL, Russ and Sierra played matchmaker with DK and his singer GF. Dude's going to be a cheese ball like Russ did. Oh, man.
I didn't even know they were best buddies until I saw that picture there at the
DK trained like DK did a lot of training with Russ even after Russ left in LA all the time as they trained together. So.
For sure. But the matchmaker thing is pretty funny because I always thought when honestly, I came back around on Russell Wilson. I like him now. I was rooting for him in Pittsburgh. But it was a kind of a bitter way to end his Seahawks career. And I really think the downfall started when he got involved with Sierra. Like, I mean, it just really it just got weird. Everything got weird. And I think now, to Sun 1Z's point, let's just not let that happen to DK Metcalf, because I like DK, man. Just come on. Just don't go the Russ route.
I think Russ is fine. Like, I don't think Sierra's got anything to do with it. I like her music from back in the day, but like,
Oh man, but she hasn't had a hit in like 20 years, right? I mean, she was trying to get him out to New York to revive her career and all that stuff. And she was the one to get him out of the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, well,
Maybe
we'll
he's
see
a
how it
guy.
all kind of goes. Metal Dragon here comes in. Dan's got Griff on tonight. Too bad you guys can't stagger these shows well. I'm going to try and
we
watch
gotta
both at
coordinate
the
with
same
Dan.
time. Appreciate you, Metal Dragon. I know Wish I Was Flying an X-Wing also said the same thing. We will do a better job in the future of trying to coordinate. I know Mookie got his comment in there about the Hawks Zone rundown.
Well, I was just gonna say, I mean, Dan should know better that hey, it's Pulse of the Hawks on Monday nights, right? Like
We're being counter programmed. This is like
yeah, exactly, right?
Podcast wars going on right now.
Oh boy. And then we got a $2 donation here from WD Ford. He goes, second round flyer with an extra pick. You going running back or QB? That extra second round pick. I'd say there's a higher chance of it being a quarterback than it is of a running back. The way that this running back group is built in this draft class, there will even be good UDFAs and guys in the 7th round that you can take that can come in and be effective in your running back room. I think there'd be a higher chance that they take a quarterback with that pick than they do a running back.
I think I would need a new laptop and a new television set if they take a running back in the 2nd round again.
yeah.
Like, please stop this bit. There's so many great running backs. John Doe said if John goes running back in the 2nd round again, people will be pissed. Hell yeah, they'll be pissed because like so many of them that have been taken over the last 6-7 years. Go fix your offensive line first and then deal with getting a running back later. Like, who would be the first running back taken? A Genty probably, and then maybe Amari and Hampton after him. But like RJ Harvey's probably going day 3. Damian Martinez, the Virginia Tech guy, I don't know how high he'll go, but there are so many running backs as options. What's the Tennessee guy? Dylan Sampson. There's so many options. You could take it in any round after round 3. But the top picks you got 5 picks in the top 100. 0 of them should be on running backs. I mean, I'm dead serious. 0 of them should be on running backs with how deep this class is.
Agreed. And we got an interesting one here we'll get a couple more here. Blue and green zone. Do you all think we have 4 starting linemen right now before a draft? And is Jenkins the missing piece? For me, I would say there is a potential. I think you are more likely to have one of the guys on the roster being potentially your starting right guard. I think centers may be more of a stretch. I still think they're going to draft somebody to be potentially the eventual heir apparent to if they do sign Jenkins at left guard, because they may sign Jenkins to a 2-year deal and it's got a lot of guarantees based on his injury history if he can stay healthy. And that's where you see them take like a Tate Ratledge or something. I think center's more of the concern than maybe the other spots. I don't know, Mookie, what do you think?
Well, minimum we got 2 starters. So Cross, left tackle. Abe Lucas has been working out. He's been looking good at right tackle. There is 0 need to move him to guard. I know this has been speculated for like 2 seasons running. He's not going to guard. And there's functionally no legitimate reason to do so unless there are like bigger issues with his knee than we realize. So your tackles are bookended. Left guard, if Jenkins signs, he can play either left or right guard. But if he's a left guard, then you solidify the left side of the line. That leaves you with center and right guard. Oluwatimi, I mean, this is going to really depend on how the coaching staff views him, because 2 previous coaching staffs didn't believe in him as a day one as a starting center. And then right guard is up in the air because it could be Anthony Bradford, kind of the forgotten Seahawk because we wish to forget all of his penalties and other issues. And then there's Christian Haynes and Satella Lomea, and we'll see who else goes through. Even Sundell could kick out the guard. He's an option there. So I think if you sign Jenkins, you've got 3 starters, and then we'll figure out what you do at center and right guard. I think those would be the spots where Seattle would draft, and more specifically go after guard center combos through the draft.
All right, so we got this one here. Sam had more time to throw than Geno did last year. That's fair. I think he did a bit. I wouldn't say it was a astronomical difference, but I would agree with that point. There's another one here, blue and green zone. Next, Marshawn, I think it's supposed to say Lynch, not lunch, is Scattaboo. I would not go that far. I like Scatterboo. Don't get me wrong. He had a great run this season with Arizona State. I wouldn't put him on the same level as a Marshawn Lynch. Marshawn Lynch was what, the 13th or somewhere in the top teens pick for the Buffalo Bills in that draft class. I don't put Scatterboo in that same that company there. And we'll end on that one tonight, guys. And I appreciate everyone being in on the viewer Q&A. Mookie, what do you got coming up on field goals?
Well, I'm just trying to think of what we do have coming up. I'm pretty sure, Michael Thompson just did a great 7-round mock draft for us on Sunday. We also had a guest piece on Sam Darnold from Doug Farrar, who has been part of the writing circles for a long time and just did a guest piece for field goals. So be sure to check that out. Later on this week, hopefully we have contract details regarding Darnold, and not just whatever Florio reported, but like full on submitted to Over the Cap. They've got the contract details on Darnold, Kupp, and Lawrence, so we could analyze that a bit more. And we might as well just start getting into some draft previews pretty soon, because like this first week of free agency is come and gone. The Seahawks probably not going to sign too many more people in free agency that are of consequence over the remaining period of free agency. The draft is just a month and a week away, and going from 3 picks of the top 100 to 5 has totally changed the equation. So we've got a whole lot to look forward to next month. And go read our mock drafts and not the 2-round mock drafts that some of the more established people do, because they seem to just pick whoever they believe should go to Seattle, not here's how the Seahawks normally think, and here's who would be a good fit for Seattle. So yeah, check out our mock drafts, because it's not just Michael doing it. I mean, Talk Zone Rundown also does mock drafts regularly, and I'm sure you two have got something coming up soon as well.
We do. We will be doing a mock draft.
That's a good
on the
name.
Hawk Zone. We could call it a mock zone.
Mock
I'm good
Zone
with that.
Rundown. Yes.
We got one of those coming up on Sunday. Me and Ryan will be doing that live. We'll be doing a 7-round mock draft there to do our first one together on the show. Saturday, I will be on with the guys from 12 Talk, Josh and Mitch over there on the other side of the pond. I'll be there doing a live show with them, talking about draft crushes and a mock draft there. And we just actually recorded a great show with Corbin Smith of the Emerald City Spectrum, which will be dropping tomorrow. So make sure you guys are tuned in for that one. It was a really great show with Corbin, brought some really good insight to us. So yeah, those are kind of the things coming up on the Hawk Zone Rundown this week.
Awesome stuff, guys. Again, another Pulse of the Hawks come and gone. We appreciate everybody in the comments section chiming in. It
came in. Brandon's already got it going. Time to enter the mock zone. I like it. There we go.
I love it. There could be a t-shirt coming soon too. With
there we go. Exactly.
So, it's gonna be cool. It's mock zone season, so it's gonna be it's great, because especially if we get Jenkins off the board now, it's like you can kind of really dial in and zone in on, what a realistic draft could possibly look like. So it's going to be a lot of fun. So that's going to be coming up for us. And then just, we're going to have guests on throughout leading up to, so to get some different insights. So guys, appreciate everybody chiming in, tuning in. Mookie, appreciate it again. And we will see you guys coming up on the next one. Go Hawks.
Go Hawks.